Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jonathan Ware, and I'm the Chief Executive of Localis. And a warm welcome to everyone to today's policy webinar, New Values Revisited. In order of today, we're going to have a policy webinar, going to take an hour or just less. The purpose of this is to discuss a brand new Localis report, New Values, New Landscape. For those of us who were around last October, we put out a report with our partners, Norse Group, New Values, looking at how the latest of our series of reports about the strategic value of local procurement commissioning, looking at how the Procurement Act might take effect, how it could be best used for people, places, and communities. And since that time, so really a note of omission, Angela Rayner's speech at the Local Government Association conference in Liverpool set us thinking again, with her emphasis on returning to insourcing, well, and the Cabinet Office consultation. How could we take this further? What have we learned? So what was our report, which our senior researcher Callum McClinton wrote, is really assessing this strategic procurement in a changing policy landscape. What it means to have a unified statutory framework, and making social value a legal obligation in public contracting. Clearly, we're not, this isn't happening independently of other things. For us, for looking at local government, this intersects with the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, which has been promoting greater local autonomy, as well as some of the strictures of the planning and the infrastructure bill and legislation, which offers some synergy, we think, but risks centralising certain other decisions and potentially limiting locally tailored social value outcomes. Earlier this year, we've also had in June, we had the spending review for 2025, and along with this, the 10-year infrastructure strategy. What signals did this send the sector for long-term planning, multi-year funding and budgeting, as well as the ongoing fiscal pressures, which are driving local commissioning in the context of how do we get efficiency and innovation with the spending envelope we have at local level to play with. So looking forward, we've had the Cabinet Office consultation, which has been proposing further reforms, things like 3-year SME VCSE spend targets, allowing for flexible tendering for people-focused services, public interest tests for major contracts, and standardising social value metrics. For our money at Localis, all this is very good stuff. It aligns with the new values approach, which was advocating for innovative hybrid models of delivery, such as LATCOs, which balance flexibility and accountability. However, we also think that investment in local capacity for procurement and skills is essential, without which councils might struggle to fully harness the benefits they have to hand. So as strategic procurement becomes more central to local delivery, we think the focus must remain on enabling place-based, people-focused outcomes through empowered and well-resourced authorities. So those are kind of the top lines. Hopefully everyone has received this in the link before they got the joining instructions today to our report. Otherwise, we will send it out later. But that is really it from Localis. We have invited a terrific panel of experts to talk through what's moved on in the year since New Values launched. We've got Lindsay Maguire, Deputy Director for Procurement Reform at the Cabinet Office. We have the inevitable, ubiquitous Darren Nowd, Chief Executive of Dr. Node Limited, but I'll let you tell you where you've been before, Darren. It's a good story. Local partnerships, great friends of Localis, and delighted to have Sarah Joy Lewis from Local Partnerships to give us your view of assisting local authorities through this. And last, but by no means least, our research partners, without which this would not be happening, Paul Power, Group Strategic Development Director for Norse Group. So in terms of the timetable for today, in that order, I'm going to invite our special guest speakers to give their views, no holds barred, on how they see the landscape for strategic local procurement as having changed and improved and evolved over the last year and in more recent years. And then, since we've got a good number of colleagues joining the webinar, we'll debate some of the issues amongst ourselves. But I would heartily encourage, since you've got such a brains trust on hand, to throw your questions into the Q&A box, and we will do our very, very best to answer them in the 55 minutes and counting we have left. So, if that sounds good enough for you, I'm going to invite our speakers in that order, starting with Lindsay Maguire, to tell us what you think 1 year on and to get the party started. Lindsay, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you for the invite. And good morning, everyone. Good morning. Yes, it is still morning. It's been quite a long morning already. But yeah, so I'm Lindsay Maguire. I am leading procurement reform within Cabinet Office, which sort of sits as part of the government commercial function. So we are working with our ministers and across sectors to identify where there's opportunities to reform elements of the procurement system. I'm conscious I don't have much time, so what I was thinking I would do is just give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the really interesting behaviours and things that we've seen from the Procurement Act, which went live in February, and also touch on a couple of the topics that you've just mentioned there, Jonathan, about local growth, place-based partnerships, social value, etc., and what Cabinet Office is thinking around the future of that consultation. So firstly, with the Procurement Act, we went live in February. So it is still very early days. I think there is a slight misconception that everything was going to change immediately. But I suspect everyone on this call understands that the public sector simply doesn't work like that. And procurement, there's a long lag when it comes to actually identifying the sort of changes. So this is long-term change. It's not going to be overnight. But certainly we're seeing a really positive uptake on some of the principles around how procurement teams work with the market in that very early phase. And for me, if procurement is going to be a strategic enabler to the delivery of all of these lofty policy ideals, this very much starts with making sure that procurement has got a seat at the table very early on in that policy development, but also it starts with asking the right questions from the marketplace at the right point. I think we fall into a bit of a trap sometimes where procurement is seen as quite a technical function where it goes to the market with a pre-designed list of questions, and the market gives answers to that pre-designed list of questions. My vision for our function, and certainly in the space of services which are incredibly important to vulnerable citizens, like sort of housing, social care, etc., is actually if you go to the market with a slightly more strategic outcome-based set of questions, the market will work with you on providing what that solution needs to be. And that's done through a number of things. So pre-market engagement is a huge tool which I couldn't advocate more for, and we're seeing some really good patterns. Contracting authorities and organisations are really using this, so they are going to the market with open questions, open ideas in order to shape their procurements. The other aspect is I think we're not always good in procurement at looking across the whole of the landscape, and this is where place-based and local growth opportunities really can play a part. Within central government, we're good at looking at central government. Within local government, there's some really good networks within local government, but what we've aimed to do is piece all of that together. And so when we're publishing pipelines, for example, you can now go online and have a look at a pipeline which spans across the whole of the procurement landscape with lots and lots of different customers. And what that is showing is that there's very similar things being bought and designed from different customers, whether that's housing, universities, local government, central government. And I think using that data and looking at procurement across the whole of the system will enable some of those patterns to emerge, and it will also enable us to collaborate a lot more as a function. So a couple of my sort of favourite anecdotes around how the Procurement Act is landing is actually not about the big, exciting, flexible, sophisticated stuff. It's simply that someone has been looking at the data, they've realised that a neighbouring council is about to do something very similar. They've picked up the phone and actually had that conversation and collaborated against what that procurement could look like. And that's good for the suppliers because it's not overloading the system, and it's good for the taxpayer because it's going to have a positive impact on the commerciality of it. So there's lots of really good things happening. SMEs in particular are engaged and they are working with the customers. There are obviously some barriers, like I think that's inevitable. We're very governance driven and we are quite risk averse, rightly, when we're using taxpayers' money. So this cultural change isn't going to happen overnight, but I am quite hopeful that we're seeing some very positive stories. In terms of what comes next, exactly as you said, Jonathan, we've got a really good opportunity to make sure that that procurement is being used as a strategic enabler for British businesses, communities, growing industry, skills, resilience, etc. And social value obviously plays a key part of this. I think the challenge around social value, which is brilliant, and I'm sure Darren will talk about a bit more about this, and it's great as an enabler, and it's really important that we are getting the best social value. But quite often we see social value for the sake of social value rather than social value that is actually relevant to what it is that you're buying, what it is that you're doing, and how communities are reacting to that. So I think our vision for social value is that it's taken at a strategic level with all of the questions emerging from the communities in mind. And that's the sort of basis of what we've been consulting on. And we've had a number of responses. We've had over 800 responses, which is actually really good for a central government consultation, especially one on a comparatively niche subject such as strategic procurement. But what we're seeing through those responses is a broad acceptance of how important social value is, but a real drive towards that standardization in terms of making sure it actually delivers on some of the kind of core questions. And I think that's really interesting. And certainly that is absolutely something that we want to continue talking about. What we're going to do with that consultation is we've got all of the data. So thanks to everyone if you provided a submission. We'll do a response to that, but we'll continue with these conversations in terms of our policy development. And then if time allows and if parliamentary process allows, we'll look at what that could look like in legislation. I'm quite keen that we don't overload the system, but I'm also quite keen that actually money is being spent in the right way, in the right places. And that's quite important for us, I think, and something we want to reflect on as we go forward. Okay, I'll pause there because I'm keen to hear from the others and take some questions.
Lindsay, that was perfect. You got us off to a flyer. Many thanks indeed. I'm now going to invite Darren to come and say your piece, please. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and thanks for inviting me. Really interested in this topic. I'll try and not cover the issues that Lindsay has, but I think as a headline, we had Procurement Act Live on Tuesday at Excel in London, reflecting on 6 months. And I think it's fair to say the mood in the dressing room, as they say in football parlance, is very positive. The legislation has landed really well, which is not a surprise, given the extensive collaboration and engagement that all parts of government, central government, local government have had with the Cabinet Office. I think it's still very early to draw any significant conclusions, and obviously a lot of the procurements that have started will not yet have finished and be delivering outcomes. But I think 2 really exciting opportunities. One is the preliminary market engagement piece, and something that I'm particularly passionate about is the competitive, flexible procedure. And I think it was probably about 5 years ago when I had the first meetings with Cabinet Office, and they were saying, if you could rewrite the rules to be perfect, what would you do? And I didn't use the words competitive flexible procedure, but the concept of it was something I pushed. And ironically, the Cabinet Office colleague at the time said, "Oh, that's a good idea, but that'll never happen." And ironically, it did. So, well done and fair play to the Cabinet Office for giving us really a super policy and legislative landscape to deliver good procurement outcomes and particularly social value. I'm a big fan of the concept of the National Procurement Policy Statement, and I think that's very tactically astute, because, as Lindsay knows better than anybody, it takes a long time to get through the parliamentary process to change things. But having an act that has the National Procurement Policy Statement that is a lot more nimble and can change maybe as political priorities change or even political parties change, I think is really clever. And some of the wording in that I particularly like, regarding having regard to, rather than just consider, for example, that was in the Public Services Social Value Act. So, there are some people who say, and this is true, that the Act doesn't mention social value, and it doesn't. But actually, if you look at the National Procurement Policy Statement, that's all about social value. And for me, social value now is at the top table with a much stronger influence over things going forward, which augurs well for outcomes. But I think an important point Lindsay raised that I'm quite passionate about is the delivery of the right social value for the right place and the right project. So 35 years experience in global private sector and local government, and leading social value for local government for 7 years. Every project is different. Every category of spend is different. Every place is different. And I probably accuse myself of this. I've delivered some tremendous social value numbers and initiatives. Was it the right social value for that place at that point in time? Was the social value delivered sustainably? I can't really answer all of those questions with any evidence. I hope so, but I can't prove it. So I think it's really, really important that procurers are given the opportunity to engage early, which we can now do, to engage with communities and the SMEs and the VCSE sector and local communities to identify the right kind, the right type of social value for a project, which at the end, and I initiated, when I was at Durham County Council, something called the County Durham Pound, which was born out of the pandemic, when I realised that all the Darrens in County Durham, whether they were university, police, fire, health, colleges, even Northumbria Water, we were all dealing with the same customer, just through a very slightly different lens. And even though we weren't contractually collaborating, that was maybe a byproduct of some of the stuff that came out, but it wasn't the primary intention. We had a place-based analysis carried out about where we had commonality, and we initiated the County Durham Pound, and we developed our own TOMS, themes, outcomes and measures, which has proved to be incredibly powerful and impactful. And you've got place-based people working together for the people to deliver real social value outcomes that the place wants, rather than any individual organisation wants. So I think that's really, really powerful. I think opportunistic. The preliminary market engagement is, they all say, like, careful what you wish for. I have had feedback from many colleagues and ex-colleagues who are saying the preliminary market engagement has been incredibly helpful, but I'm really busy now. So that engagement is actually working really well. The SME and the VCSE community are really starting to grasp the opportunity and engage, which means there's a lot more conversations going on, a lot more information being exchanged, which again augurs well for good procurement outcomes. But we need to make sure that procurement organisations are resourced effectively in terms of capacity and capability to deal with things, to take advantage of the situation. So I'll pause there. So that's my 2 penneth worth to get us going.
Many thanks indeed, Darren. That was wonderful. Thank you. Next in line, Sarah J. Joy Lewis. Director, Local Partnerships. Be great to hear from you. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. And as Jonathan touched on in his introduction, it is a really interesting time for the sector at the moment in terms of central government policy acting on local government. You've got a real focus on local government reorganisation and devolution, and Jonathan mentioned the bill there. And of course, also mentioned by Jonathan, that work towards the implementation of a manifesto commitment to see the largest wave of insourcing in a generation. And alongside all of that, we've also got from Labour these massive house building targets, which of course are not all the responsibility of local government, but which will absolutely need a big contribution from local government to be achieved, and therefore whole new ways of working and a massive delivery ramp up. So I don't have very much time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how all of that policy context intersects and overlays with social value and with the changes that we're seeing coming through from the Procurement Act. As Darren talked about, we've got the MPPS and that sort of clear desire of national government to be using procurement to deliver on these policy priorities and more widely around economic growth, SMEs and social value. So if we think, I guess, first of all, about local government reorganisation, for those going through LGR, it will, of course, be taking up a lot of headspace. And I think Darren's point made just then about procurement resource and capacity is really important when we're thinking about LGR. Of course, that's not the whole sector, it's 21 areas, so about 17% of authorities. But I think as we're waiting for those decisions around the future shape of local government in those areas and those accompanying statutory orders, we're really seeing a mix of things happening. So we've got some authorities who are fast tracking decisions, trying to get stuff done ahead of LGR. But in a lot of areas, we're seeing a holding fire and a waiting for shadow authorities to be in place. And in most cases, elections for those new authorities won't be happening until May 2027. So we could be seeing quite a period of treading water when it comes to contracts and service delivery. Specifically in terms of social value for authorities experiencing LGR, I think a number of issues are going to arise. Firstly, I think there's going to be, as I've mentioned, and as Dan said, that issue of capacity. In LGR, a lot of the focus for vesting days and safe and legal. So I think there is a real risk there that existing work that's been done, really good initiatives, gets lost. However, don't want to just be negative. There's also lots of opportunities, and particularly as new authorities come out of the other side of the LGR process 2 to 3 years from now, because in many cases they will be starting afresh, not just on procurement, but on contract management. And we might well see some of these new authorities taking the opportunity to make the most of new flexibilities and to deliver on newly created visions for the area they represent with newly consolidated buying power. In terms of insourcing, there's also to be some really clear signals around the public interest test and the work of MHCLG. I think we're perhaps in a little bit of a time of uncertainty with the departure of Angela Rayner. It's not clear yet how Alison McGovern and Steve Reed will or won't take that forward, but I do think that regardless of the national government, there is already an increasing drive towards insourcing. We saw that reported by Localis in the New Value report, and that's being driven as much by market failure on the ground and the realities of complex service delivery as any particular policy objectives. So I think it's interesting again to see how an insourced or a hybrid model might play out in terms of benefits for local communities, but also opportunities to work in the sort of hybrid model with local authority trading companies or with SMEs in communities. And finally, I just wanted to touch on that ambition for the 1.5 million new homes by 2029. I think from my point of view, when we think about social value, public sector housing delivery is an area where there's been real success and there's a mature approach that has borne fruit. I mean, obviously there's always more to do, but I feel for the sector, a real area of focus should be on how that can all be scaled up. So actually, if we're if more is being delivered, how can we make sure that social value doesn't get lost as there's this big focus on targets? How can we make sure it remains embedded? At local partnerships, we run a scheme called the SME Pilot Scheme, which is all about supporting local government to get SMEs in their area to deliver housing on small sites. And yeah, my challenge to the sector, to you guys in the room, is how do you make sure you retain excellent work you were doing in that real push for targets in that scaled up delivery environment? And I guess my closing thing to say is that we're talking a lot about procurement. Obviously, the Act is called the Procurement Act, and requiring social value there is great, but it's only the first step in the process. It's only the first hurdle, because actually it's not just about what you specify, it's about that coming through in your contract management. And I really welcome the increased focus on contract management in the Procurement Act. But I think for all of us here in this room, what we need to be thinking about is actually how do we manage that social value through so that you're getting the benefit of what you're seeking to procure. And yeah, I'll hand back to Jonathan and look forward to all your questions.
Sarah Joy, many thanks indeed. That's wonderful. And our final panel speaker, Paul Power, the Group Strategic Director for Norse Group. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, look, I work for the Norse Group, and Norse Group is one of the largest LATCOs in the country, wholly owned by Norfolk County Council. And I think I just want to say thank you, Localis and Jonathan, for the work that you've done on the new values, new landscape. I think it's a really well-structured, well-thought-out report that really reflects and builds on the work of new values. But really crucially, I think really puts a context in properly in regards to the two big bills going through Parliament, the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill, but also the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. So linking with that, I think that's a really crucial piece of work. And you coined this phrase in there about social prosperity. And I guess I want to just talk about two key themes through the eyes of service delivery and services, but really with the aim of improving social prosperity is the word, the phrase that you use, Jonathan. I think no conversation would be wholesome without using LGR. So let me do that. I think in terms of services, as my first theme. So I think LGR is happening. Roughly around 50% of the population is involved in this, as you would all know. And I think day one, it's a tough task. There's an incredible amount of work that's been done by the local authorities involved so far. So the task for day one is to be safe and legal. But I think just to be, in terms of procuring of services, I think that's just going to be the start for you. If the ambition stops there, I don't think LGR will achieve what it's meant to be achieving. And in terms of getting to social prosperity, I think you need to use procurement through the lens of prevention and early intervention in the delivery of services. And the report talks about this in quite some depth, that the procurement should be about solutions, not just a prescriptive process. I think there's plenty of evidence out there in terms of place. I think Darren talked about place and the importance of that. And I'm going to just quote a stat that I've used a few times before, so no apologies for that, but I got this from a contact at the Health Economics Unit at what was NHS England. If you look at any environment, any place, any services from your local authority, 20% is the health determinants of people, of our societies. 20% are from clinical care, so they're already in the system. The other 80% are broken down as such. 10% from the physical environment, services in the physical environment, 30% from health behaviours, 40% from socioeconomic factors. So that 80%, local authorities can influence. That's a big chunk that they can influence, but when they come round to procuring and designing services. So here's the key point. For this to work, I think local knowledge is critical. There's a high amount of local trust in local communities, in local SMEs and VCSEs. Unfortunately, or fortunately, these are, in localities, these are very, very visible. The engagement of SMEs and VCSEs, and sometimes the performance of local authorities is measured by them engaging with SMEs and VCSEs in that local environment. There needs to be a larger involvement of the local ecosystem, and what I mean by that is a much bigger need when we're procuring services, or designing services, of involving the third sector, co-designing with SMEs and VCSEs, and local design. I think that's critical for that to work really well going forward. I think my second point is really about the actual delivery. So the report goes on, and as Sarah Joy mentioned, about to discuss the delivery mechanisms. And I wanted to touch on some of the interests that we're seeing in the market as a local authority trading company. We're seeing, amongst a big wave of insourcing, we're seeing, although that's there is the obvious challenge that we're seeing in the market of lack of capacity, a lack of resource, lack of expertise, and bandwidth, just with LGR happening in local authorities. And with that in mind, the role of the LATCO, the local authority trading company, I think stands up. Those organisations like ours are publicly owned entities, so they work to the agenda right now. They have direct public accountability. They offer operational flexibility. So if you look at some of the services and some of the legislative things coming forward, the unknowns happening, then these are, I think the model does have the view to operate and operate in a sustainable manner on a long-term basis. But crucially, there's a significant amount of control retained within the operation of a local authority trading company. So I think specific themes that we're seeing over the last 6 months, I think in most of our work that we're doing today in responding to tender, social value is always and definitely one of the key aspects of evaluation. We're really seeing that. We're seeing social value being embedded into the design of the service that we're looking for, and also into the ongoing stewardship of the project or the service. We're really seeing that. I think in some areas, we're seeing very much a shift in social value. For instance, if they've got military or forces based in that area, we're seeing a real focus and a real, much bigger than before, a detail required or requested in terms of the social value that can be delivered with veterans, for instance, or if there's a prison in that locality. We're seeing a real focus coming forward in what's really going to happen and how we can help that community of ex-offenders. So my final point, I think the takeaway is, I think listening to everyone, I don't think public procurement is just a technical process anymore, contract process. I think really public procurement is now moving and taking a step forward, and it's really about community outcomes and community well-being. I think that's where public procurement is going. Thank you.
Many thanks indeed, Paul. Well, we've heard from all of our panelists now. Now, opportunity to throw any questions, have a debate about this into the mix. Darren, if I start us off, wait for further questions to come through. We were just discussing earlier in the green room about essentially about your issues around transparency and the public interest test. Is it? I guess one argument is you can deliver. I think a lot we heard from Lindsay, Sarah Joy, yourself, and Paul is how we get social value more place and context specific. I think there has been a lot of good work in making it less generic. But would a public interest test necessarily help better decision making along the line? What's your take?
Well, first of all, I think transparency is a good thing, and not least because it's going to be helpful to the market to see what has happened, what is happening, what might happen, etc., and also give us good data to better inform future decisions. I think my nervousness about the public interest test is if this is related, for example, to what I would call from my global private sector days, make versus buy studies or delivery model assessments, in terms of mandating that public bodies should publicise why they've outsourced or why they've insourced, because I do think that would have quite perverse consequences. In terms of, well, first and foremost, you'll have organisations having to publicise their own internal commercial interest information and secrets and methods and costings, etc., which will weaken the the position of the organisation. But I also think it would create a lack of trust in the market. So I wasn't around at the time of compulsory competitive tendering, CCT, I think it was called. But that did a lot of damage in terms of trust in public procurement, where you had public procurement organisations going to market because they had to, rather than they wanted to. And consequently, then the supply base were, involved in a lot of bidding activity, and they didn't know whether it was a real competition or not, or whether the organisation would outsource or not. So there was a lot of time and effort wasted. But also, you get manipulations of, management cost information. So, I know from my time in the private sector, if we wanted to outsource something or insource something, we managed that via the management accountancy overhead absorption. And, you could make something look competitive, you could make it look uncompetitive to suit your needs. So whilst I think transparency is a really good thing, I don't think we should be mandating public organisations to share all of their data about why they're outsourcing and why they're insourcing, and they should be allowed to really use the freedoms and the innovation of the Procurement Act to deliver the right outcome. And when they are going to market, they're really going to market with a purpose, rather than just going to market because it's mandated that they've got to do some kind of transparent public interest tests with data. I may be wrong in terms of if that's an intention, but if the intention is, open transparency on make the buy, I would strongly warn against that from my experience, private sector and public sector.
Many thanks, Dan. Lindsay, Sarah Joy, Paul, want to come into this? You don't have to, but if anyone wants to, be our guest.
I think what's interesting about the public interest test, if it is implemented, and I guess the insourcing policy more widely very much considers services, I guess, like they're a big chunk, and like your only option is all in or all out. And I think actually, there needs to be quite, I guess, a more nuanced conversation about the best way to achieve some of the policy objectives there. Obviously, we are seeing like a really difficult environment, particularly around like social care in terms of local government delivery. But as Paul was saying, there are opportunities around LATCOs, but I think there are also opportunities for more of a hybrid model. And actually, if we're thinking about social value, that can be a really good way to make sure we're getting those outcomes in terms of people being employed in communities on good terms and conditions. I think a really great objective, but doesn't necessarily need, I feel, the blunt instrument of, I think, Darren, what you were trying to say about the public interest test. It's not necessarily what it's trying to achieve. It's like, is that the right mechanism? But obviously consultation's ongoing, and I think it will be really interesting to see how that policy shapes and develops. And I imagine Lindsay can give us a slightly more government perspective on that situation. Not to land you in it, Lindsay.
No, I think I think that's right. And actually, I think that Darren, you summarised it pretty well. And Sarah Joy, your point about all or nothing, I think, is quite a key one. Essentially, this is a kind of a commitment through the sort of make work pay area, and we've done a bit of work already through the Employment Rights Bill on things like 2-tier codes in procurement, which we see quite a lot. And this is the opportunity to essentially make sure that authorities are having that right discussion. The challenge for me, exactly as you said, Darren, is making sure that that discussion happens at the right time and at the right strategic level. And an output of that discussion might be, as you say, Sarah Joy, maybe it makes sense to insource some elements. I think there's quite a lot of authorities that are looking at their own insourcing plans at the moment. So certainly things like bus drivers, I think, and social care is another really good example. But we do want it to be a tool that is functional, and then it has teeth, and it's used at the right point, rather than being seen as purely something that I've got to do this as a tick box exercise. We do something similar in central government already. We do sort of delivery model assessments, but they're not published, and they tend to happen pre-business case. And there's a slight quirk on some of the Procurement Act stuff, where Procurement Act actually only kicked in once you've already decided that there is a procurement. So positioning this is proving to be quite tricky. But I think if it's received as the strategic intention that it's received, and not simply as government overreach or government control, then it's a step for the positive.
Many thanks, Lindsay. Paul, do you want to come in quickly?
Yes, just very quickly. I think that I agree with most of the comments. I think my only comment, I guess, from my perspective, is that right now I think there's an exemption for that, for the public interest test. But I think realistically going forward, just 2 points. I think there is a place for it, as long as it's done properly, the right way, just to demonstrate your business case and the value to the public. I think that's fair enough. The only concern I would have is that it doesn't become too cumbersome or too over-engineered, so that it stops and hinders pace. I think that's the key thing. There's enough going on in the local authorities over the next few years to occupy them. There's something else to hinder pace or slow things down just for the sake of it. I think that the balance needs to be struck there.
Many thanks, Paul. And while I've got you there, sounded good. Great question from Vivian Holland. She asked, how can value for money be assured in LATCO contracts? Paul, you take it. You get first dibs on this.
Okay, thank you. How long have I got? Look, that's a really good question, I have to say. I think the key thing to remember with the LATCO, and certainly with our model, it's quite a unique model in that, if I can describe how that would work, is we would form a partnership with the local authority, and quite typical with many other LATCOs. And that vehicle is there, a created vehicle, is jointly owned by the local authority and the LATCO, whatever it is. And that joint ownership controls all the function and exerts direct control as to exactly what happens on a yearly basis or whenever, or legislation changes, whatever. So there's direct control there and direct influence. It's not a contract that would have been set, I guess, with an outsourced provider previously, where it's set there and the contract is set, and you have to go through change notices and negotiate and so on. I think the flexibility is retained, but that direct control, along with that comes direct accountability. It's a public owned body, so with that comes direct accountability and transparency. So the value for money is continually demonstrated, and through that direct control that a local authority would have.
That was a very good response. Many thanks, Paul. And you didn't hog all the time either, for which I'm very grateful. As Darren was making the point, commemorating 100 years of Margaret Thatcher's birth, it gave us the CCT regime in the first place, which proves it's very circular. Sarah Joy, Lindsay, Darren, any thoughts for you about value for money and LATCOs or other commercial models?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in several of these in the past, and I think the most important thing is at the outset of the business case is, what are you trying to achieve? What outcomes are you trying to achieve? And obviously you can approach the market from a competitive point of view. But one of the benefits of a LATCO, where an organisation has got control, is, and this may sound a little bit odd where I'm saying the public sector is more nimble than the private sector. If you want to change things quickly, you can, because you control the organisation and you can redesign or you can make savings. So I go back and, this is when procurement was still in black and white, when we had, 2010, 11, when you had the coalition government, and local government had 30-40% cost reduction in year imposed to deliver by the coalition government at that time. If all of the major services had been outsourced at that time, it would have been impossible to deliver the savings on the budgets that were actually taken away from local government by the Treasury. Whereas if you've got your own in-house function or a LATCO or some kind of hybrid scenario, you can react really quickly and you can manage things effectively. And also, I think, as we've seen in the last couple of years, when I think I left local government January 24, and there was some odd supplier behaviour in certain markets, and consequently then councils were turning to insourcing because the market wasn't delivering the outcomes that the outsourcing had perceived. So I think you've got to go right back to the beginning about what are you trying to achieve. And also, one of the other benefits of insourcing, and I guess LATCOs as well, is the social value impact, because you're using local labour, you're using local supply bases, and you're recirculating, money, creating wealth in your own economy, rather than procuring maybe from further away. But at the bottom line for me is, what do you want to achieve? But also, we have to recognise, and this is a critical thing, whether we're talking about insourcing, outsourcing, social value, every category of spend is different. Every market is different. Every place is different. You have to strategically consider all those things. So blunt tools about you must do this are not really helpful when you need to be able to be innovative, creative, and strategic.
Many thanks, Dan. Paul, I see your hand is up, so I'll give you right reply, and then over to Lindsay and Sarah Joy if they want to get involved.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just wanted to come back on Darren's point, and just to try and visualize it, the point he was making about, in a LATCO, in this wave of insourcing, if flexibility is required. I just wanted to just briefly just try and help people see that. While LGR is going on, I mentioned the point about bins being collected is again a very visible service, and again how the performance of a council can be judged. If you look at flexibility that's required right now, if you look at waste collection, bins collecting, you would have different regimes as councils come together, different days bins collected, different bins collected on different days. You would have different types of vehicles. As unitarization happens, neighbouring councils would have different vehicles, different T's and C's of people. You've got the legislative changes happening with food waste coming in next March. The year after that, 3-stream collections coming in, green bins, green waste being paid for, or some people having green bin collections that's free of charge. So there's a complexity there. It sounds very simple, but the complexity there is immense. And going back to Darren's point, if there's control over the service and how you're delivering that service through a mechanism, well, if you've got that control through a LATCO, then that helps deliver that flexibility and for you to shape that as time goes on. I just wanted to illustrate that on the back of Darren's point.
Okie dokie. Lindsay, Sarah Joy, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think to sort of agree probably with Darren and Paul. Obviously, Darren said it's very complex. It'll depend service to service how we think about value for money. But there is that point about the risk and the cost of risk, and of course what risk you can and can't transfer in a contract. And I guess probably what is true and a lot of LATCO type arrangement is you're able to, I guess, hold more of that risk, but in that control there is a value that I think often isn't seen when we're doing a classic procurement. You get a lower price, but there's a lot of unseen cost in the risk that isn't transferred, which perhaps in a more collaborative LATCO type arrangement you can look at. So I think that's certainly one to look out for when organisations are thinking about their delivery models and value for money.
Many thanks indeed. Lindsay, any thoughts from you?
No, I'm not an expert in this, so I think probably move on to the next.
Excellent. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, and so Danny K, you've had your question in longest, and this brings us to thank you for raising it, Sarah Joy, that 1.5 million housing target, which isn't going away any soon. Since the financial crisis of 2007-8, SME house builders were hit very hard by that. Danny asked, the SME builders and developers, they can't afford the rigmarole of expensive procurement processes in competition with limited scope for success. Can the new Act allow authorities and others to identify the right partners and make these selections without competitive tendering? Any answers, anyone, please? Lindsay,
so below,
please.
yes. So below 5 million, yes, yes, you can. So there's various thresholds above which you have to essentially kind of do a fair and open competition. But for work, so specifically for kind of construction works, LAs can contract directly with SMEs. The challenge on these types of things is not actually anything to do with legislation. It comes to organisations, governance, finance teams wanting to make sure that you've got the right value for money. So often local authorities will put in a process for that kind of competition, but it's not strictly necessary, and it's always a bit difficult to get the right balance. But the Procurement Act actually allows a relative amount of flexibility for this type of goods and services.
Many thanks, Lindsay. And while I've got you there, you might be able to answer this one from Sandra Beaton. Any comments on how VCSEs, SMEs and startups could best access the new impact funding announcement, and any other measures available to support VCSEs access the opportunities within the Act, which, since they already struggle to access commissioning and grant funding? Any?
So I've been trying to get some more information on that impact funding in parallel, because I'm not actually it's sort of outside of my policy area. I think what we'll say is that we have tried to design the Act so it breaks down the barriers for VCSEs. So we've now got a kind of a tick box on the platform, which sort of allows organisations to tick where it's particularly suitable for VCSEs. So searching against that criteria should make it easy to look at the opportunities. I think also things like pipelines, as I've mentioned, and pre-market engagement and keyword searches will give VCSEs a kind of a much clearer picture of what is being bought at what point. We are also introducing VCSE targets for central government for VCSE spending, which we've never done before. So we've really focused on SMEs, and I think that's going to start shifting the dial slightly into really focusing on the needs of those VCSEs. We've got a bit of work to do on that, but we are starting to sort of chip away at some of those governance barriers on that.
Many thanks.
I will try and find out more about the impact funding, and then I'll answer in a bit more detail.
Okay, so Sandra, we'll get back to you with further details on that, if that is okay. Very conscious of time. We've got about sort of 5 minutes left. So one final question, then I'll ask our brilliant panelists just to give their reflections, any sort of summary points of what they've gathered from today's session and our report. Nico van Ruin asks, when joint projects are delivered by, say, a LATCO and an SME, how to ensure the risks are shared proportionately, and can the social value contribution of each partner be clearly defined and measured? Any thoughts on that from anyone?
Yeah, I can maybe pick that. It's quite a specific
Thank you.
question, but I think obviously if you've got a LATCO organisation, they've been set up and established to do certain things and perform and deliver certain outcomes. But that LATCO itself will still potentially need, it depends on the category of spend, it may need a supply chain. So I think it's quite typical for, for LATCOs they'll do certain things themselves, but then also procure or outsource other items, and that needs to be clearly defined about what the role sharing is. And I think, again, there's a lot of benefits of SMEs working with LATCOs, particularly if they're working within the community. But from my experience, I think it's important to have clear. I'm not a big fan of demarcation, but I think you need demarcation in terms of the individual roles of what the LATCO is going to deliver and what the supply chain or the supply partner is going to deliver. Because the last thing you want is one blaming the other for an ultimate customer deficiency. And I think, from a social value perspective, each of those organisations can, be the LATCO or the supply-based SME or VCSE can deliver certain things. But I am a big fan, and not everybody is, about the measurement of social value objectively. So a lot of social value is, particularly in the central government model, is a qualitative assessment, whereas if you look at local government, it's very much a quantitative assessment, and I think that's quite important. Obviously, that quantitative measure is helpful in terms of commitments, holding people to account, being able to transparently and fairly evaluate suppliers against each other. But it doesn't, that measurement is only one part of the story. You've still got to deliver that social value, and you've got to make sure that social value is sustainable and delivering outcomes. So there's a big difference here, a long debate about the differences between outputs and outcomes. So I think I'll finish there on that one.
Many thanks, Darren. Since I've got you on screen, Darren, we're going to just wrap this session up. Any sort of bullet point thoughts and summaries from our webinar, saying anything you heard at Excel earlier in the week about where we are currently?
I think procurement's never been a better place in the public sector. We've got the Procurement Act now, which gives procurers everything they need to deliver the best possible outcomes. I think we're in a really, really good place. I think social value has been escalated in terms of the opportunities. I think it's great for SMEs and VCSEs, but it will take time. And, I think as Lindsay touched upon earlier, procurement people have played this game for a long time using a set of rules that have been there, for several years. And we need to be able to experiment and try to do new things, but importantly, collaborate and share the good outcomes. And I know there's community of practices that are proven to be really, really helpful. But overall, for me, I'm in a very good place with my rose-tinted glasses on today.
Excellent. Any final thoughts from you, Lindsay, about what you've heard today or earlier week too about where we are?
No, I think that's been really helpful, and it's always interesting to hear Darren and Sarah Joy and Paul's insights of how the system is functioning at different levels. So I think we've got a real opportunity to look at the kind of benefits that procurement can bring for place-based communities. So yeah, interesting to see how it goes.
Many thanks. Sarah Joy, quick final thoughts from you, please.
Yeah, I think you won't be surprised to hear me say, it's great hearing from Darren, that the world of procurement's in a brilliant place. We've got these new freedoms. They'll take a while to flow through, but I think what's really important is that innovation experimentation at the procurement stage then feeds into really effective contract management, so that we see the great things we're now able to procure and the use of those freedoms really flowing into really effective service delivery in social value, but also more widely for the communities in which local government works.
Thank you, Sarah Joy. Final word is yours, Paul, before we dismiss.
Thank you, Jonathan. Look, really interesting. Some really good insight I've gained today. My closing thing is just really I would say this: I welcome the Procurement Act, and I think where it's going. I would just my giveaway to everyone, or the takeaway is just think about it and use about it with the outcomes in mind. You know, the eventual outcomes, the final. Use it from that. Look at it from that angle, and design and design what you want to do and your procurement on that basis. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to bring things to an end now. Gratitude to the attitude. Thank you so much for our fantastic panel. Thanks for joining the webinar, for your questions. Do give us any further feedback on Callan's report, New Values, New Landscapes today. And we hope to see you at a future Localis event. Live long and prosper. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.